Good afternoon, everyone. I am going to be filling in for our chair today, and I'm going to chair the meeting. I was asked to send over the apologies for Judge Holmes. She is away. I believe she is teaching a judicial course. So I am going to be chairing the advisory board meeting for this particular session. I am going to ask for some assistance from Madam President with the NAACP to move the appropriate people into this room so we can have the conversations and discussions about the items that are on the agenda for today. I'm going to also ask your indulgence to bear with me so we can stay on time and be mindful of everyone's time and adhere to the norms. No crosstalk, double talk, over talk. Raise your hand electronically or via the camera so I can see it. And we will allow our presenters to present and then any conversation or questions thereafter. I see that our superintendent is online. I'm a little early, but nonetheless, we are happy to have you. And because you are here, and I want to be mindful of your time, I am going to yield the floor to you to give us a presentation on our next year that is almost upon us, starts next week. We're all looking forward to the new school year. And for this advisory board, I think the issues that are of great importance to us are how we are going to address suspensions, expulsions, and arrests within our school system, how we're going to address those issues and balance that with student safety so that we do not have a overrepresentation of children of color or children of poverty or children of mental illnesses entering into our juvenile justice system or being expelled from school. So with that being said, I'm going to turn the floor over to Superintendent Cartwright, and I'm sure there'll be some questions thereafter for the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to make sure I say on the very front end that when it comes to discipline, the juvenile justice system, those kind of things is something that have had history and continue to want to have a positive influence on because with the understanding there are many things that happen when students are in the K-12 system that influences what their future is going to be. We know that if they're not successful by the end of third grade in order to be able to read, and it's just not just the functionality of reading, but even moreover, being able to comprehend and start utilizing reading and as a form to be able to learn new knowledge, that unfortunately the likelihood of them being incarcerated dramatically increases. So we're cognizant of that. So what kind of things are we doing in order to address that particular data point? And one of the things that we have done and will continue to do is we did change our reading methodology last school year. And where it's a little bit more of what we call explicit instruction, meaning that we are very intentionally teaching how to read so that fluency, those, sounding out words, those kind of things start becoming the area to where our students aren't struggling, which prevents them from getting into the comprehension and the ability to make sure that they are reading in order to learn new knowledge. So the previous system we had was, it was balanced, excuse me, I'm going to forget the name of it. Smarter Balance. No, that's not it. Holy cow. Dr. Wanza, can you help me out on this one?
You said it first, balanced literacy.
Literacy, thank you. And now we're going into the science of reading, and which again is a much more explicit process. It also helps to work with some of our students who may not be diagnosed yet with dyslexia. With this particular approach, it also helps for them to learn how to read and that disability not get in the way. And that would definitely be for more of your moderate to milder cases of students with dyslexia as to how to go forward with that. We also know that how we teach our social skills, social emotional learning, and how we empower our students with mental health resources makes a huge difference as well. So how do we work with our students to help them make better choices when they're maybe in the heat of a moment and not being able to think completely through a situation in this scenario. This past year was, frankly speaking, was a very difficult year. Being virtual for a year and a half thereabouts, a lot of our skills, even as adults, a lot of us were struggling with some of our social skills and how do we appropriately interact with one another. So we've taken some programs, really trying to allow this to be from our students for our students, as well as our adults being strategic and having those meaningful conversations with our students. I think is really important. Because if we don't teach the skills intentionally, then that's when, unfortunately, sometimes behaviors that we don't want to see start to happen, such as fighting. And so how do we have conversations? How do we have civil engagement and talk through things rather than taking into physical, any type of physical aggression? We know that for children who unfortunately don't have these opportunities, or children who do get into school and struggle with some of these skills, again, are at a higher likelihood of being incarcerated when they leave school. And that's if they even graduate. And so these are two areas that we know that we have to be very intentional on. And there are areas that we've started making some adjustments to. We will continue. The social, emotional, mental health support is extremely important. We are not going to. So I'm sorry, I got the question here. So something that we'll have to do. The beautiful thing is that while we won't call it social emotional learning, the skills that they're talking about is actually incorporated in some of the curriculum that's state approved. So we will continue to work through that. It is not indoctrination. It truly is, how do you interact with one another so that way we can prevent some of the emotions that may happen in the future and cause them to get.
Superintendent Cartwright, I don't want to interrupt you, but I know there may be questions that are appearing in the question and answer. The questions that you'll receive are going to be from the panelists. If you could just focus on those issues, specifically pertaining to suspension, expulsion, arrest, and/or any training that the school district has put in place throughout the summer for teachers and/or principals or administrators to better reduce or address those issues with expulsion, arrest, or suspension within the school system.
Certainly. So the reason I was talking about the two topics previous is because that helps us address things at the root cause level and really getting to the rationale as to what is causing a lot of our students to be suspended, to be expelled, or to be arrested. And so until we can start really getting to the root cause, we can put other things into place, and we will continue to do that, such as the Promise program, because that is a way in which we can prevent our students from becoming arrested, right? And so there's a lot of commitment to that. We also started rolling out last year, and we will continue to do this. I know Ms. Hedge and her department is working on the training modules, but when we're talking about classroom management or verbal de-escalation strategies in order to prevent students from getting into the escalated state. So we started last year with one of our trainings towards the end of the school year. And I know that we have ongoing trainings that will be occurring this upcoming school year for our teachers and related to that area. And again, the basis of that, again, is to try to get to the roots so that individuals don't escalate higher within the behaviors or the non-desirable behaviors within the classroom. So that way we address it from the root cause there. Other things that, again, the commitment to the Promise program is definitely still there. I'm not changing any of our prior commitments related to this. I think it's very important. We want to make sure that we are keeping our students engaged in school. I think it's important to this particular program that not only it continued, but the commitment that it's not just the student, but also the student's guardians or parents that have to commit to this program as well, is very important because it provides that enhanced pro-social skills, but on a short-term basis, but it's on site and is also longer term from the school-based progress monitoring piece. So not only do we have an infraction, but now we're going to go back and we'll review that. How would we handle it differently? We monitor, we do more of a wraparound approach, and we have the home situation with us as well. So that way the students not only being supported at the school environment, but also in their home environment. I think that's important.
Well, I want to thank you for making that statement and that commitment to the Promise program. I know that is something that Broward County, particularly this board, has been very supportive of, and I applaud you for that. But I want to be mindful of your time, and I know there's some questions from some of the other members of the advisory board. But my one question before I open it up to everyone else is the commitment to the Promise program is important. But the recognition that when families are engaged in that program, there's better outcomes. But I've also recognized that we have to have some engagement from principals and teachers and law enforcement, because they are the first gatekeepers to determine whether or not you're going to even qualify for the program. So what have you done to bolster and strengthen the buy-in and the engagement of principals and teachers and folks within the school system to first start down that path so the children get the help that they need?
That goes back to some of the things that some of the actions that we started taking last school year, is really helping people understand that we have to look at the larger pictures and really have to look at what's going on. Even this year, the theme that we have set for this school year amongst staff is about relationships, grace, and respect. And why did we start with that theme is because to help people understand that we really need to make sure that we have positive relationships with one another and our students that we serve, that we have to show grace, that sometimes things are happening behind the scenes that you may not be aware of. And so, as a result of that, you've got to be able to show a little bit of grace to individuals until you have the opportunity to understand maybe a little bit better of what's going on, which you will be able to do if you have those relationships in place. And then with respect, we know that you have to get respect, you have to give respect. And so that is how we started this school year. And that is the theme as my principals are meeting with their staff right now. They are echoing a lot of those messages out to them as well, so that we set the tone of the school year with a positive mindset in order to really start getting at the understanding that we've got to make sure that we're taking care of all students.
Thank you. We could go on forever, but I want to open it up for any discussion from the advisory board. Any questions, just raise your hand. I know there are some questions. I see Madam President, NAACP, Marsha Ellison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Since Promise's inception, we've had an issue with training, not enough training. So my question is, what are you going to do? I've seen some fabulous photos of new principals and assistant principals. And so what will the training look like? And what will, for lack of a better word, accountability look like for those folk whose children who qualify but may not have been offered Promise, for example, instead were taken in a different direction?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that last part there.
Or what will the accountability look like for those schools or school leaders who, instead of offering the child promise for whatever reason, they were gone into a different direction. Say they may have been consequenced differently instead of offered promise. Is there something in place to deal with those schools that may ignore a promise and do something different?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I did here recently is I did reorganize the entire district. It was intentionally done because I wanted to ensure that we were providing services closer to our schools, but it also allows for a larger ability to hold people accountable and to monitor data on a closer basis. I know Associate Superintendent Dr. Wanza has her schools as well, and that she's going to be monitoring. She's on the call. It's the only reason I'm calling on her. But we also have 3 other regional superintendents, and I'm giving names just in case people need to know. For the North, it's Dr. Jermaine Fleming. For the Central region, it is Darius Adamson. And then for the South region, it is Alan Strauss. One of the things that has happened again is looking at this from a systems and process standpoint. And by putting those resources closer in, now we can monitor that type of data much closer than what we were doing previously, and in a little bit more of a timely sense to be able to get in there and intervene when we need to.
Mr. Chair, if I follow up, if I may.
Yes, please.
And so one of the main pillars of promise was, and hopefully still is, that when the child leaves the promise site and he or she returns to their school, that there will be documentation that that tells them how to deal with this child, whether it be resources, whether it have just been something else. They wouldn't just be returned, and this has happened. So there has to be an auditing situation that was supposed to be in place, and I'm not saying it is or isn't. I know that what the commitment was, so that then when the child returns, that school deals with the child based on whatever the evaluation showed that might the services that the child may need. Is that happening, and is the auditing of that process still happening?
I would not be able to answer the question related to the auditing piece of that. I may, if it's okay with you, please, ma'am, to ask either Dr. Watkins or Ms. Hudge to answer that portion of it. But I do know the piece as far as a transition plan going back to the school, and it's supposed to be a plan that will utilize the interventions that are in place while they're in promise, that are working, so that when they return back to their school, the school is aware of what those interventions are, and that they should be ensuring a continuance of those interventions, because the plan for, with the promise program, that's really a lot, is giving you that time to really figure out what we need to be doing for each individual in order to help them be successful. And once we've got something in place that's helping them be successful, then we've got to be able to implement that back into their traditional school. So I agree with you. And as to a monitoring or an audit program, can either one of you please help me with that? Dr. Watkins.
Thank you, Dr. Cartwright. So we have, under the new organizational structure, we have beefed up the promise team that's district-based. And so we have a largest group of individuals that include administrators who are participating in an ongoing monitoring process, where we are going to look at doing site visits and making sure that we're not only looking at the documentation, ensuring that the transition of students after completion is done with fidelity. That includes students who commit infractions at the end of the year and have to transition to a new school, but also the transition that happens throughout the year. And so we've developed a monitoring process that's going to happen on a weekly basis, where we will be looking at our database, our DMS system, our BMS, as well as doing site visits. We actually have a meeting coming up with Pine Ridge, which is the school that houses Promise, and we're meeting with Dr. Wanza and her team to discuss the logistics of what that may look like. And we're going to work together through Dr. Wanza's office and through Ms. Hudge to continuously meet, review documentation, interview, and observe, and then report back.
And Mr. Watkins, if I could add on, good afternoon, everyone, first of all. Not only that, we are going to be looking at the data. One of the things that Mr. Watkins and the team shared with me was exactly, Ms. Ellison, what you mentioned earlier. What is the process for following up? And that was the reason why we made the decision to really put a team together that just focuses on the promise piece. I wanted to also be able to include in data and really look at the data from all of the different arms. And since the since the mental health areas in SHOP as well, really cross-referencing that, because as Dr. Cartwright said earlier on, sometimes the behaviors that we see are stemming from some deeper rooted issues. And so how do we make sure that just because there's an infraction that occurred or a student gets into a situation, that we're really providing them with the resources and services that they need beyond just the infraction. So these are some of the reasons why we've developed these teams, if you will, around certain initiatives, and Promise has a now dedicated team to just follow up and be boots on the ground to ensure that we're not dropping, that we're not falling through the cracks on some of the services that may be needed.
Thank you very kindly. Colonel Holmes.
Yes, I think this is more of a statement than a question. I think at this time it's very important for both law enforcement and the school board staff, security staff to work together and addressing more so that mental health aspect of behavior that has occurred and that we anticipate. Usually this time of the year, especially early in the year, our threat management unit, they investigate threats that are made at the schools, and we're expecting, because post-COVID, that have to deal with more of those type of issues. It's important for us to work hand in hand and make sure that these young kids are getting the treatment, the proper treatment. A lot of people think, oh, enforcement. A lot of these kids are just victims of what's going on in society right now. And it's important for us to work hand in hand with the school board to make sure that we are treating these kids properly and making sure they're getting the services properly. And I'm saying that from a law enforcement perspective, because a lot of times people think that law enforcement doesn't have that type of mindset. But we're working hard with our side of the house to make sure that our staff understands that. We actually have training at one of the schools tomorrow, critical incident training. And that's one of the things that we're going to address. So it's very, very important for us to work hand in hand with the security staff.
Thank you very kindly. Any other questions? I'm going to start calling names because I know Commissioner Alston has a question. And
may I ask a question since we're waiting on other hands, Mr. Chair?
Yes, Madam President.
So I'm concerned that when the child is removed from the classroom and goes to Promise, I know that there is a process when they go over to Promise, but what are the responsibilities of the student and the teacher regarding the assignment, the classwork on the days that they're missed from their home school?
Dr. Watkins, can you address that, please?
So one of the most important things that happens when a child commits a Promise eligible infraction and they're assigned to Promise is that they have an understanding of how they have harmed someone else, how they can correct the behavior. So much of the focus for the students while they're in Promise is getting the individual counseling, getting the therapy, doing the behavior modules aligned with the infraction that was committed. And as in addition to that, then receiving the classwork that they should have while they are there. One of the things that we're going to do differently is really closely monitor the assignments that they should get while they are in Promise, and also working with the schools as part of the transition so that they are not falling behind if in fact some of the academic work that took place at school while they were in promise, they may not have received. So we are going to be working very closely with schools to ensure that they're not penalized academically for getting the support that they need while they're with the Promise program.
And I'll ask you to please follow up with that, because there was an incident there was a problem that we're having difficulty solving, of how, if the kid is going to be there for 3 days or whatever, how do you get their work assignment to them? And that, quite frankly, wasn't really happening. So we wanted to make sure you go on the record. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Brother Nicola Obel.
You're on mute.
You're on mute.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ms. Cartwright, for having us. Look, I want to ask a question. We mentioned audit earlier, and oftentimes, depending on who auditing provide different perspective and insight, right? But we also know that when auditing taking place by an independent source that's not involved with the school system per se, or that may be more involved from a community stakeholder standpoint and understand how Promise work, do we have anyone that's independent of the school that's serving on this audit team?
I think that question is posed to the superintendent.
So to my knowledge, I do not believe that we have someone from the audit team that we're talking about that Dr. Watkins was describing. Is more of an inward facing group that is meeting with, we're reviewing it in a more frequent manner. And we're also looking to ensure that not only is a plan in place, but we're also looking to make sure that there's a quality plan in place. We've made some shifts and some transitions. So for example, even with behavior threat assessments, we now have a department that oversees behavior threat assessments. And the reason we did that is because not only are we trying to ensure that we are in compliance with the law, but we also want to address the quality of the plan, because if we don't get to a place where we are addressing why these behaviors are occurring, then we're not, it's that much difficult, it's too difficult to try to modify or adjust behaviors going forward. So to answer your question succinctly, no, we do not have an independent auditor that is auditing these plans. It is a function within the district right now.
Thank you, Superintendent Cartwright. How much time do we have with you? Because I have another question, but I don't want to extend your time if you're backed up on another engagement.
I appreciate that. I've got about 5 more minutes, if that's okay.
All right.
I appreciate just having an opportunity to talk with all of you as well.
Seeing that there are no other questions, I'm going to pose my statement and my question to Mr. Roosevelt. Mr. Walters, do you have a question?
Yes. Yes, I do. I'll be brief since you only got a couple of minutes. Good afternoon, Madam Superintendent. Let me just say that I normally don't talk in these meetings because my grandmother said you learn most when your mouth is. And so I don't talk much, but I do have a couple of questions for you real quick, and that is school-based wide, who is tracking the demographics of those kids that get in trouble? Is there someone that I can ask, say, last week, how many kids got in trouble and what were the demographics?
I know that in Dr. Watkins' area, that's some of the things that he is monitoring as well. Dr. Watkins, do you want to speak a little bit more specific to that?
Sure. So we do pull the data based on race, gender, by school, and student by student. We humanize the data. And so we pull it through a variety of methods. We get that primarily from BASIS in our discipline management system. And we're able to pull that demographic data and have it readily available.
And I know, Mr. Watkins, that some of the programs that these kids, that is what we call trouble kids, get into, all of them don't go to Promise. So are the other programs is designed to be punitive or corrective?
So, I think the model district-wide is an attempt to be prescriptive and corrective and not punitive. And I think that is our goal, to have prevention and intervention as a primary focus of how we support students who commit, behavioral infractions, and not harsh punishment. And exclusionary practices is something that we try to, steer away from at all costs. And so, we're continuing to work to improve our practices each day. And I think we still have some work to do, but I think we've made some significant progress, over the years.
I would like to thank Superintendent Cartwright for joining us, entertaining some questions, giving us some updates on our upcoming school year. We're all looking forward to a safe, healthy, productive school year. But what's been mindful to many of the members of this advisory board and to the community of Broward County is that we do not see high numbers of arrests, expulsions, and suspensions from our schools. And I think the greatest concern, and I'm glad you raised Promise, is that school A in my community is going to have the same type of grace that school B in somebody else's community is going to have. That the behaviors that may occur in my school are going to be addressed similar to the behaviors that occur in other schools. And Promise was more memorialized because there was disparities in the way things were handled throughout this district. And we wanted to make sure that every child would get some grace for minor involvement that would not lead to automatic arrest or suspension from school. So I applaud you for having the courage and the fortitude to continue on with a successful and promising program. And also, you are always welcome to come to the advisory board. You will find a number of members here on this advisory board are here, able and willing to assist you and the school system in any capacity that we can, offer our insight or our efforts to improve the well-being of children in Broward County. So if you need someone on your audit committee, if you need some guidance on how to put those reporting together or the fidelity of the program, we are all available and we will assist in that manner. So I thank you, and we're going to continue on with the agenda. So with that said, I think we're going to move on to the next item, which is also school-based issue. It's the issue, who's going to be reporting on metal detectors in the schools and how that's going to be rolled out moving forward. Who's prepared on that item? That Dr. Wanza? Mr. Watkins?
So hello, I didn't know I was supposed to report out on that, but I can tell you that we do have a policy that's gone before the board. I know that Mr. Kowalski and the team spoke at the last meeting. We did do a pilot, they talked to you all about the pilot. And so it is my understanding, and Superintendent Cartwright, you can correct me if I'm wrong, it is my understanding that we will begin the process this school year, particularly starting in our high schools and our non-traditional schools start there.
And our middle schools.
And our middle schools. And we are definitely going to continue the wanding and all of that at our sporting events. But I know that you're most concerned about during the school day and what that looks like. So I can certainly speak with Chief Alberti and his team and bring a follow-up at our next meeting. But it is my understanding that we will definitely start to implement the procedures and processes district-wide this school year. Dr. Cartwright, you can.
I'll give you a couple highlights real fast here before I have to jump off, and I apologize about that. It is done through a randomization process. It's computer generated. That way it takes away from any potential biases that are in place. And the visits are logged. The search is completed by trained staff. And whenever a classroom has randomly been selected, it does apply to all students in the classroom as well as their personal effects.
Have you gotten any feedback from parents or students on how they feel about being randomly wand in school?
Well, the research behind this approach, I'm just going to be very frank with you, it is because of the randomness as to what it is, why it works. Personally, I used to supervise a school over in Orange County as a principal supervisor, and in this school, it was a school for students with disabilities, and every day we've wanded the students before they even came on camp, as they were coming on campus every single day. Do you know I still found guns on that campus? And so the randomness is intentional because you just never know if your classroom is going to be selected or not. And so it causes individuals to do that pause. Do I really want to bring this to school or not? And that is what we are trying to accomplish, is to have people second guess if they are bringing any type of weapon on the campus, that maybe is not the best interest of myself to do this, because you just never know if my classroom is going to be selected or not.
Any questions on that one item from the board? Anyone have any questions of the superintendent before she has to leave? Seeing none, hearing none, I'm going to move on to the next item, which
Thank you,
is,
everyone.
thank you,
Mr.
Superintendent.
Chair,
Yes, ma'am.
we had asked Mr. Watkins to please give us a snapshot of the 5-year school-based arrest.
I was moving right to that right next. Ms. Watkins, if you could address that issue on the 5-year outward-looking, strike that, backward-looking data on the school-based arrests in Broward County schools.
Not a problem. I'm going to share my screen.
Can you? Do you have authority?
Both disabled, so I need to have. Try it now. Okay.
All righty.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay. The first thing I would like to show the board is our district demographic data in a different way. So if you look at the top where it says SY school year 21-22 district demographic overview, we captured 256,000 students for the 21-22 school year. I believe that raw numbers humanize the data. And so we have 104,000 Black students, which comprises about 40% of the total student population. We have 94,000 Hispanic students, which is about 37% of the district's population. We have 36,000, almost 37,000 non-Hispanic white students. And for our Pacific Islanders, Asian, Native American, multiracial, and other groups, there are about 20,000, almost 21,000 students. So I wanted to put some numbers in context as far as that. And now I'm going to go to our arrest data. So I took the arrest data back to 2014. So I went a little even further back, 2014 school year through 2022. And so if you look at arrest grand total from school year 2014, 186, school year 2015, 528, 16, 410, 17, 350. The school year 2018, the district was not able to accurately capture data for that school year. I do not know why. So skip or strike 2018 and 2019, 406. You see it trending downward we had an incomplete year for 2020. That was the COVID year, where we had a hard stop in March, and then 36 in 2021, where we were remote learning for the majority of the year. And for last school year, we had an uptick from the last full year, which was 2019, with 420. Now, when you go to we broke it down male, female. And as you can see, males from 2014 through 2020, it's about 3 to 1 male to female based on school-related arrests that's captured by the district. We've broken this data down by race, ethnicity. So where you saw that initial data set that I shared at the beginning, you see, even though African-American or Black students are about 40%, they still constitute more than 70% in some cases in the earlier years of the arrest. And you look at 2019, 205, it closes, where you see white data increase for that 2019, you see the 2020, but when you compare 2019, the last complete year, with 2022, you see another uptick with Black students, and you see a decrease with Hispanic, an increase with other, and a decrease with white students. And then of course, we broke it down by elementary, middle, and high as well. When you look at the frequency, where you have grand total, you see the uptick, the higher data sets pre-2020, and you see the reduction overall. There's a reduction, a slight downturn for this past school year, but the numbers are steady but declining. So, one of the things that I think I wanted to put in context is, the Broward County Public Schools is not an arresting agency. So, the school system doesn't arrest. However, the school district does track students who commit infractions that are arrestable offenses. And so what you may see are arrestable offenses with confirmed arrests that happen at school, but it may not always be the exact same data that you may see from other data sources, because the data that we provide can be a subset of other data sources such as DJJ, and also a subset of adult arrest data that may not be captured by DJJ. So this is what is captured in the school district based on information that corresponds to an infraction that happens in school, in the school-sponsored events, or on a school bus.
I have a question. If we go back up to gender, if you
Yes.
scroll back to gender, it jumped out to me that there was seems to be trending differently for girls than it is for boys. Am I seeing that right, or am I seeing that wrong?
No, you're saying that correctly. I'm trying to make sure you can see it.
Girls are not having the same, well, at least from how I'm interpreting it. Girls are not, having the same impact when it comes to reducing the contacts? Is it due to the programming? Is it due to the type of incidents? Have we dug a little bit deeper into this issue?
Yes. And I think it's a combination of a lot of things, and I think there are a lot of people on this call that can probably bring context to what may be happening in the schools, and I'm not putting Dr. Wanzo on the spot. I only know that based on, things that happen in the schools, whether it's drugs, whether it's other types of infractions that might have a different impact. It may have an impact on who is getting arrested. I do have some additional data that might bring some context to it as well.
I apologize for being early and jumping in. Go right ahead, Dr. Watkins.
Okay. So let me share with you what this is this data set that I'm showing you now is called, the acronym is called SESA. And the term is School Environmental Safety Incident Reporting System. And it collects data on 26 incidents of crime, violence, disruptive behaviors that occur on school grounds. That happen on buses, and off-campus school-sponsored events at any time during a 24-hour, 12-month school year. And these are incidents that are reported by schools to the district, which in turn are information that we report up to the state. Now, this is data that captures incidents and not necessarily individuals. So for example, you could have one big fight with 10 students, that is one incident. Or you may have 10 mutual combatants that happen. And so it could tell a very different story. Is there a climate concern where there's some ongoing issues, or was it an isolated big event that in a different data set of how many students were suspended or expelled may read differently because it's a particular incident. So let me share with you the different types of incidents or events that happen in a school. And they vary from school to school. So what I just provided is the top 10 incidents that happen based on the type of assessor we report. So if you see here to the left, for example, I'll just pick out a couple. You have fighting. So I provided a list of the top 10 schools that had an incident of fighting. So where you see Dillard 6 to 12, 136, 136 isn't this number of students, it is the number of incidents that occurred this past school year. If you look at, for example, tobacco, the number of incidents that were reported for tobacco, you see Western Cypress Bay Monarch at the top of that infraction list. When you see something such as disruption on campus major, which have lesser reportings, you'll see the top 10 list of schools. And so that's sort of where we capture these types of data, and we can break these data sets down by gender, race, school by school, those types of infractions.
Can we entertain any questions at this point? Are there any questions at this point?
Mr. Chair,
Yes, ma'am.
on the previous chart, I think it said, if I'm not mistaken, 34 elementary students were arrested, I think during the school year 2022. I'd be interested in follow-up information to know what those arrests were for, and the outcome of those cases.
So,
Thank you.
you're welcome. And just, and of course, for those who are experts, can please jump in. So one of the things, and I think we discussed it at the last meeting, is when schools report an arrest, it doesn't necessarily mean an arrest actually happened. It means that this a student may have committed an infraction that's arrestable. The law enforcement agency, for example, may have said that this is something that we plan to arrest, and the principal coded it. Or they may have said, this is something we're not going to necessarily arrest for. They discussed it later, and then an arrest was issued. So there's again, there's a lot of scenarios that could potentially influence how this data is captured. And I think we've talked about at the last meeting, other potential ways that data might reflect school related, but I wanted to kind of bring some context, but that does not change the fact that we do need to look into those 34 and see what those infractions were, and if in fact students were arrested.
And Mr. Watkins, Dr. Watkins, following on that point, I'd also encourage you, now that we see this laid out over a course of years, it is very insightful. It is very helpful to formulate some questions for us to dig a little bit deeper. And of course, the bottom line is try to improve the outcomes. Along with Madam President seeking information about 34 elementary students, I would encourage you to do a little bit deeper dive on those 137 females to see where they're at. Are they in middle school, elementary school, or high school? Is that broken down by race and ethnicity? Because something is, that trend on the girls doesn't seem to be moving. It seems to be very consistent across a course of years. So maybe we should look at that a little deeper to find out if we can find a trend as to what we can break, so we can start seeing a greater downslope in the years to come. I'm very curious about the girls, the 137, and Madam President is curious about the 34 juveniles. Strike that 34 elementary students.
And I'll end with this piece, at least from from my vantage point. When I think about the work that this CAB, and the work that's happened in the community over that window of time, I think still, when we look at the overall number, you see 104,000 students. And then when you look at the percentage of kids that we're talking, what it conveys to me is that most kids are getting it right. Most kids are doing and responding to the interventions, the supports, the mentoring, and all of the things that I think many of the folks that are around this table provide to schools and communities all the time. And I think that's why it was important that we shared this data, because I think when you look at across the nation, you will see much higher percentages based on the total student population. Even if it's 11, 12%, that's a lot of students when we talk about these types of infractions. And we're still in very low 0%, or at the highest 2% in some cases.
And I appreciate you raising that point. I think that's a very important point that we all need to be able to message and echo throughout our respective communities. When you're looking at these arrest data from schools, it is the smallest number of incidents that we are dealing with in the grand total of population, of school population. And sometimes there's this perception in the community that arrests are, every kid is in trouble in school. Every kid is getting into trouble all the time, all the time, all the time. And this data seems to suggest completely the opposite, that there's a very small number of children that are getting in trouble or finding themselves to get in trouble. And then of those smaller number, there's a number of children that are receiving some interventions that is reducing the likelihood they will get in trouble again. So the model that this community and this board and the school system have put together to deal with these infractions and contacts seems to be the move in the right direction. Now we have to fine tune certain areas, for example, the elementary students, the young ladies, and hone in a little bit deeper. Maybe we need to do something different, modify the program a little bit different for young ladies, or modify the interventions a little bit differently for children. This is why this data is important, and I want to acknowledge Madam President on this issue. The NAACP wrote a report about Broward County some many years ago. It's out there. Go look for it. And it raised the issue that we were very high in arrests in school, very high in suspensions and expulsions. And the school board had the courage to try to address that. And it's being addressed. Do not believe the demagoguery that's out there thinking that every child in school is behaving poorly, because Dr. Watkins' data, I think, shows directly the opposite. So I appreciate that. I think this is a good conversation. Dr. Strike that, Ms. Hudge, you have the floor.
Thank you, through the chair. I just wanted to kind of piggyback on what Mr. Watkins shared. We are, and as I begin to work along with Mr. Watkins in our division and looking at the data, one of the reasons why you see the data broken down into certain infractions is, we talked about these teams of individuals. One is a promise team, but we're also looking at putting boots on the ground in schools. And that's why you see the list of schools under the particular types of infractions that he's showing you, so that we can begin to put boots on the ground so that we can see exactly some of the things that you're pointing out. Why are the girls flat, and why is it trending that way? What can we do proactively in some of these areas? We have individuals in our department that focus on substance abuse. So in schools where we're seeing that there's a high case in that, to get in there on the proactive side to see the culture of the school and what could be contributing to their high numbers to reduce them as well. You heard the superintendent also talk about the behavior threat assessment department. And one of the things that we're doing is coming together with them on a frequent basis to look at students who may have several DPAs, threat assessment, and what are we doing to make sure that we're connecting them with the right resources so that we can look at decreasing that pattern of the number of behavior threat assessments we're having to do on students. So we're really looking at trying to do a shift or a ramp up, if you will, on trying to be proactive in looking at things before incidents escalate or they get to the point where it leads to an arrest. So these are some of the things that we're trending to, and we're restructuring in our division to try to provide that very proactive approach.
We appreciate the clarification. Mr. Obel? Are you at a standing desk, Mr. Obel?
Yes, I am.
I see you wobbling back and forth. Sorry.
Unfortunately, I had a back injury, so I can't sit.
Oh, I apologize.
So I would suggest, Mr. Chair, that the school board do a better job at sharing the positive narrative that we're seeing, right? So there's been some wins in this case with some numbers going down. And oftentimes what other folks are doing is sharing a different narrative that do not favor the hard work that's been done by this board and all parties involved, right? And so you kind of see that in past years. So I think the school board has to do a better job at sharing this narrative, especially when they're doing their campaigns for everything else. Well, this is the part of the story we don't get to hear about, right? Because oftentimes other folks are sharing story, and I'm just going to keep emphasize that. We got to tell the story. We need the school board to tell the story. They have this whole media press, and I think this is a great opportunity to let folks know that, hey, there's positive work that have been done and that's continuing to be done. Obviously, by the leadership of Madam President Ellison and so many others, this have come to this point, you know, and so I think they got to just be a better job of sharing the positive, and I think the school board has to be the champion for sharing that narrative. That's all I want to share, Mr. Chair.
I agree with those sentiments. I will turn it over to Dr. Wanza.
Thank you. And we certainly will take that feedback, Mike, and take that back to the ears that need to hear it here in the organization. But one of the things that I do want to, so first off, Mr. Watkins and Ms. Hudge, thank you. But one of the things that I will say is we have to acknowledge, and really as not only the school district, but as a community and a society, the influence and the impact of social media on our children, and how it has become, you know, at the root of a lot of the things that we see in school. Because if you look at a lot of the instances or incidents with our young ladies, they stem from something that started on social media. And as much as we try to work with TikTok and Instagram and Facebook and this one and that one, and, you know, no, we're not going to take it down. And then it keeps, you know, the incident keeps living, right? And so that's one thing as a society that we have to, you know, acknowledge and determine what's our best effort to address that. But I can tell you, when it comes to our young ladies, that is what we are finding is at, you know, the core of a lot of the things that we see. The other part is, and we just know this from our lived experiences and the work that we do, we can almost predict what types of incidents are going to happen to a greater degree in which schools, just by virtue of access to, you know, and societal factions and communities of schools. We can almost predict where we have a greater likelihood of seeing some incidents than others, and that could help us in our proactive work.
Ms. Michelle, you are on mute.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to echo what Dr. Wanda just said. As we're sitting here talking about this, I'm just thinking about how the cases come across my desk, what we see in the unit after students are arrested. And she's exactly right. I think the uptick with regard to girls is pretty predictable. Social media is at the core of a lot of our issues, especially those high numbers that we see on threat cases. I suppose we're going to go through another school year with possibly similar numbers, although I know that we've had heavy campaigns to try and educate these students on trying to not be so impulsive about their behavior. But there is definitely that mean girl sort of thing taking place. I think even if we're not in school, it's taking place off the campus as well. I wish parents would control their students and their children with regard to when they should be able to even be on social media, because we were seeing them at the middle school level this year. And some of the most disturbing conversations in those cases were coming from middle schoolers. Unfortunately, we all know that's the most difficult transition for any student, is those middle school years. With regard to the elementary school arrests, I had the same question as Ms. Ellison did. I was wondering where we got that number, but I think what Mr. Watkins is saying makes sense to me, because I was thinking that if it has to do with just the mere fact that it has to be reported to the school district when any student on a campus might have a potential infraction, I could tell you there were no arrest cases that came across our unit on elementary students. What we did see were those occasional And I know you all are aware of them. Weapons were on a school ground. The student had a weapon in their backpack, whether it was a knife or mommy or daddy's firearm in some cases, unfortunately. And I've always had a call from, if the district administrator didn't take care of it themselves in terms of not having a formal complaint done, law enforcement would contact me, and I made sure that there was no arrest that took place. So I think those are just the reporting end of it. And then I just want to add one more thing with regard to the girls. The other increase that I saw this past year is, and these literally were all females. I don't know that I had one male come through with a possession of a taser on school grounds. That is actually a third-degree felony. We were dealing with those in a very case-by-case basis because I understood the gravity of that being a charge when I can't even charge some students with the knives that they've brought on school grounds because of the pocket knife exception. But definitely the females, whether it was that they were concerned about their walk home from school, and in a lot of cases, mommy bought them the taser off of Amazon just so that they could feel their daughter was protected, which I can understand, but it does come under the statute. So I think that if we broke it down, we might see some of those iterations in that number. Thank you.
Well, we appreciate that insight. That's what I was thinking on my end when I saw the girls. But that also gives us direction on programming that we need to try to encourage the school system to put in place to address those issues. We know social media is a problem. And unfortunate for the school system who is charged with educating our students, they have to deal with the social media aspect of how that affects children when they're now dealing with their peers after something was posted on social media. So the school is in a very unique place where they have to now take on educational aspects around don't give energy to the foolishness that's posted online to very immature children that have not yet matured enough to know to let it go. So, these are realities, but if we do not speak on these narratives and explain these things, people will see something on the news and think, oh, there's this huge mess in the school system, when in fact, if a young lady says that she, is afraid to walk home from school and wants some help or some security and asks for a taser, most folks won't think that that's inappropriate to give her a taser, not knowing that that's going to cause a problem when she brings it into the school. And we have to be able to explain those things to individuals because context is important. When you just see the numbers, you see, oh, things are bad. You see it on news, it's, oh, it's bad. But you have to explain it through. So I appreciate you, Ms. Michelle, for giving that context. I echo Mr. Obell's encouragement of school systems to put out some of the narratives about what these numbers really mean in the grand scheme of it. But I am going to be mindful of time and move on to our reporting.
Mr. Chair,
Madam President.
I wanted to.
Your hand is raised. I didn't see it.
Yeah, that's fine. I wanted to. I want to know the data of the 34, because if the school district is saying somebody told them that they were going to get arrested, but they didn't get arrested, but they're reporting it as arrest, to me that's a problem. The way it was explained to me was the system was set up. The question is when the school leader who is in charge of discipline, it says, was the child arrested? And they check the box. Yes, no. But if they're saying it could have been, could be not, that's an issue for me. But I would like to know on those students what really happened. And finally, I think it was Dr. Hudge referenced a little earlier about schools, resources or interventions for those schools that made the top 10 and the school-based arrests. And that's great. I would love to know what those are, but I would like to go back to the promise incidences, who ranked the highest without making it a bad thing or a shameful thing for their reporting. But if you recall, we removed the elementary students from the Promise program, and I'm not convinced that the district put in resources for those children who may need resources at the elementary school level that we tried to provide with the Promise program. So I would ask that the district give some consideration to reviewing the Promise incidences with schools with the highest number of Promise incidences to provide interventions and resources, and certainly a review of the elementary school. I'd like to know what resources are provided for elementary schools for those students who were they a little old to be eligible for Promise? Thank you.
Madam Chair, I appreciate that. I was watching Dr. Watkins as you were speaking, and I know he was taking notes. And he's going to, we're going to revisit this, I think, at the next meeting because this was a good first start with the data. But based on some of the questions that we received from the board, I think we should come back and revisit some of these issues, particularly the piece that Madam President was talking about with the Promise data. Let's look at the girls incidents. And also let's look at those elementary arrests and flesh that out a little bit more so we can get to the root cause of it. I appreciate you, Madam President, for reminding me. So we are going to table this portion of the meeting with respect to school board arrest data, and we'll come back at our next meeting and revisit it based on Dr. Watkins's further presentation of some more data. Is that agreeable?
I do appreciate the team allowing us to present, and I also appreciate the honorary doctorate that the Circle 17 Advisory Board has bestowed upon me. But I will not correct my superintendent in front of her, so I will, make sure that she, is aware that those of you who have worked hard for those doctorates are not disrespected by us.
You're always a doctor to me, Mr. Watkins. So with that being said, you can drop down the share screen, and we're going to move on to our civil citation presentation.
Mr. Chair,
yes,
Mr. Chair,
Mr.
sorry to
Obel?
interrupt. Is it possible for Brother Watkins to send that out to the rest of us so we can help with the positive narrative being shared? And so when some of us are out in the community talking about some work that's being done, we can at least have something to reference.
I have no problem forwarding that information. Mr. Watkins, if you forward it to me, I will make sure the advisory board members receive it so they can further look into it and develop questions at your next presentation.
Not a problem. If someone could call me offline and help me share on Zoom, I'm a Teams person. So I'm trying to click this stop share. Hold on.
All righty. So
All right,
we're going to turn it over to Ms. Gaynor.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Mr. Watkins. Let's strike that, Mr. Walters.
I appreciate you. I've been raising my hand, but you didn't recognize it. I just have a quick question for verification purposes. For Mr. Watkins. Mr. Watkins, on Monday there was a little melee and there were 10 students involved, and you said it was 10 students but one incident. That's correct? And so that goes down one incident, 10 students. On Tuesday, we had the same 10 students, very similar melee. Now that's 2 incidents. Is that still 10 students or 20 students?
So the way we report that incident to the state is it would be 2 incidents. But what we capture locally are the number of students in each of those. So what we would capture locally for the data would be 20.
But it was the same 10. It was the same 10 students now. I understand it's 2 incidents, but the same 10 students. So are we in our final tally, if 5 days in a row, 10 students got involved in the same type of an incident, are we saying that that's 5 incidents, 10 students, or 5 incidents, 50 students, even though it was the same 10? I'm trying to clear up the numbers that you have there in black on the final column, whether or not we are actually counting students, because there's no way that says second offense, third offense, so I don't know how you count it.
Okay, so that's a good question. So the way we're counting those students, we're counting how many individuals have been arrested. So it's counting individuals, and it's not capturing if it does not include if David Watkins has been arrested 4 times. It's not adding the 4 tallies. It's individual students that have been arrested at least 1 time.
All righty, let's move on to, thank you for that clarification, Mr. Watkins, and thank you for the question, Mr. Walters. Let's move on to Ms. Gaynor and our civil citation. I know we're going to get an update on our law enforcement piece, but I want to let Ms. Gaynor walk us through her report. I'm going to bring it up on the screen, Ms. Gaynor. Are you there?
I'm here.
All righty. So you're good to go. You didn't see that, wrong screen. Sorry.
Okay, yes. So for the month of July, there were 18 youth referred to civil citation. If you look at the breakdown, there were 5 female and 13 male. We closed 41 cases in July. And the recidivism was 0%, and there were no second or third opportunities. The top offense remains battery at 45%, followed by petty theft at 18%. And what else would you like me to cover on the report?
I would like to talk about the missed opportunities, but I see it's not on this report.
Okay, yeah. So the missed opportunity, I would like to respectfully request that report is pushed to the next meeting because we have not received the missed opportunity report as of yet. And although we do have a screenshot of some of the month of July, it does not appear that is the full report.
Is there any particular reason why it's being held up?
So as you all know, that the missed opportunity report is a Department of Juvenile Justice report. We get the report once we're sent the report.
Ms. Evans, do you want to add in anything on that issue?
Good afternoon to all. So it's 2 different types of reports that I share out with. One, the stakeholders, that includes Ms. Gaynor and her team, the state attorney and the public defender's office. That is first-time misdemeanors who were subsequently processed through the juvenile justice system. That's the screenshot that is sent. And so I just received it yesterday. And for the month of July, that was sent out just earlier this afternoon. The missed opportunity report is a much more comprehensive report, and that has not been prepared and distributed to the chiefs for subsequent distribution to our local civil citation program. So when I receive it, it's shared out. So I have nothing to share, but I can tell you about those, the data that Tamika would have just received today, which is a glimpse into what the CAP affectionately calls the missed opportunity report.
Okay, is there any insight you want to provide us on missed opportunities that you don't have official reporting on?
Sure. So I just want to pause. Ms. Gaynor, were you finished? I know she was right in the middle as she kind of deferred.
Yeah, I don't have any insight for the report because we haven't been able to look at the actual report as of yet.
Gotcha. Okay. No problem. So for the month of July, again, we're taking this from the first-time misdemeanor case resulting in delinquency processing report. There, again, just a reminder to all, there's a public report that that everyone is able to see, and then there's one that allows us to be a little bit more, to dig a little bit deeper, as you would say. So there were a total of 11 cases that were included on, again, the first-time misdemeanor cases resulting in delinquency processing report. Of those 11 cases, 10 of those were for domestic violence matters, right? So that pretty much rules out all of them. The one case that resulted in that was not domestic violence was for a misdemeanor violent drug offense, and that was for marijuana possession less than 20 grams. However, this was for a non-Broward County youth arrested by the city of Coconut Creek. So that is a drop from last month, and that's the total number of cases on this report.
Well, we appreciate that insight. I'm going to open it up for questions, but before I do, I'm going to ask a question myself. Could we make sure that by the next meeting, we have the formal report, that we can all see it and then be able to go through it? And because there's only one, could we dig a little deeper into that so we can have some clarification on the circumstance surrounding why that child was not afforded an opportunity for civil citation? Out of county youth, in county youth, they still should be afforded an opportunity for civil citation. So it's an opportunity to use this as a case study to figure out why it didn't happen. And with that, I'll allow you to answer a question if you need to, and then I'll open it up for questions for anyone else. Any other questions? Any other questions?
Mr. Chair,
Yes, ma'am.
I would like to ask Chief Evans and Tamika if you would review and see if those were truly all domestic violence cases, or could there have been a different interpretation had a different officer arrived?
And on that
Any
note,
BSO cases, I know that Colonel Holmes agreed to kind of audit his folk, but they may not all be a BSO. So if there are any SO, if we will ask the Colonel if he would do that, and then Chief Evans review if there could have been a different charge had the officer made a different decision. Thank you.
Yes, no problem at all, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ms. Evans, for not mentioning BSO in those numbers. I really appreciate it. And it's no surprise that one happened to be the same agency that we've been talking about for the past year. And I'm sure everyone can attest to this. It starts at the top. We have to have buy-in from the top to make sure that we apply the civil citation program correctly. And it's important for the city officials of that municipality to get on the police department and their department heads to make sure that it's enforced properly. So we got a lot of work to do. It seems like we're talking about this over and over again, the same agencies, but we really got to put pressure on these city officials to make sure that their agencies are on top of it. I can tell you this from BSO standpoint, we take it seriously. All our districts know that what our protocols and our policies are, and any violation of that will be dealt with accordingly. And by the grace of God, our numbers have been down. Every now and then one slips through and we address it accordingly. So we try to stay on top of that.
Colonel Holmes, since you had the floor, give us a report on how the stopgap that's working over at if it's working at the JAC. Are you still filling that gap with certified law enforcement officers at the JAC to issue civil citations, or are you getting any pushback from any other agencies for you intervening to issue the civil citation?
So far, I checked with the staff down there. So far, so good. We haven't had any issues lately. However, I know from BSO standpoint, the stopgap measure is working. However, I know in the past, we did have a problem with one particular agency. But since then, according to my reports, we haven't had any problem. But that doesn't mean we won't have any in the near future. And that's where it ties into what I just stated earlier, that we have to make sure these agencies take it seriously and they make sure that their officers are applying it properly.
Just to follow up, when y'all having problems or a particular agency does not want to issue, does it elevate up the chain where like a colonel to colonel or colonel to major will make a call and say, could you have a conversation with your folks to let us do what we need to do on our end?
There are some agencies that you have closer relationships than with others because, your peers, you may have gone to the academy with one or worked at the same agency as others. And usually when you discuss those issues, you always come to an amicable resolution. However, there are others that may be anti specific agencies, and it makes it a lot harder And that's why we have to have outside, people get involved, and, different level people get involved. And that's why I said earlier, it's important for our city officials to be aware of it, because, these police chiefs work for the residents, and these city officials have more power and say so than they even realize. And I think that's the only way that we can really get them to jump on board with what we're trying to do.
Well, we appreciate that feedback. I see, is Major London on?
Yes, sir. I'm here.
Do you have any feedback for us on civil citation and the utilization of it by your deputies, or strike that your officers for a lot of them?
We're doing pretty good according to the report that was just shared. We didn't have anybody on the list, so I'm pleased to hear that. And hopefully when they share out the full document, it'll stay that way. And we will work very closely with Colonel Holmes' team to resolve anybody who's not stepping up to the plate to give these kids the opportunities they deserve.
We'll appreciate that. It's always important to have communication with the system that we've created, but more important, the users that are using it, because law enforcement uses this system, and we need y'all to help instill the importance of the deputies and the officers that come to the JAC, to allow the JAC to do what they need to do. And that is, if a child is eligible, issue a civil citation. So, Madam Chief Probation Officer, is there anything you would like to add with respect to civil citation?
No, sir, not at this time.
All right.
But the ask of authenticating the domestic violence cases, we'll look at these 10 that were presented in the month of July. Just to, again, just do a verification.
Could you also tell us the number of domestic violence cases that did not receive a civil citation from the beginning of the year? I would like to just get my head wrapped around how many children are not being afforded that opportunity because of domestic violence.
I can look that up for you now if you continue the meeting, but yes, it's a large percentage of eligible youth who misses window of opportunity just by virtue of, I think, of system design, but that doesn't make it right. But I'll tell you in a few minutes, Gordon. Mr. Weeks, I'm sorry, Madam, Mr. Chair. Sorry.
That's fine. If there's will from the board, this may be an area that we should get a small work group together and delve into a little bit deeper to maybe offer some suggestions on how to tackle this population. Maybe it's right for a particular intervention program or diversion program or some other stopgap to address these issues. Domestics are unusual because of the close relationship with the family member. There's oftentimes a lot of intervention you can put in place to get folks back moving in the right direction. So if the number is exorbitantly high after Chief Evans reports it, we may want to put some energy behind looking at a solution for that high number of children. They may not be eligible for civil citation, but we may find some other way to get them from going deeper into the system.
Okay, and I have that number.
Gaynor has her hand up.
Ms. Gaynor, you're muted.
As you say that, I just wanted to mention that if that's the decision made to look further into these, there might need to be a focus on how many of these domestic violence cases are female, because just looking at this screenshot and the past couple of months reports, there are a significant amount, 50% or more than 50% that are actually female. So that's something to look at as well.
I can answer all that, Mr. Chair, whenever
Go ahead.
whenever you're ready. I have the data set up.
Go ahead.
So I'm looking at the data set, and if you want me to share the screen, I can, if that would please the body.
Yes, I've stopped sharing. You can share.
Okay. Nope. I think
Madam President,
I think my permissions. Let's see, okay. Here we go. All right, can you all see? I will increase the size. Hopefully that's large enough for those who can see. So this is, again, a public dashboard, just taking a peek at. This is for fiscal year 21-22. So coming off the pandemic, I sorted by Broward County. This is showing all gender, all races, but I grouped together by case type or of domestic violence and showing all law enforcement agencies. So for this period of time, which is the fiscal year of 21-22, there were a total of 91 young people who fell into this category. And I can tell you, when you add the numbers here and other numbers, this has been a historical trend in Broward County. We have tried to work on this probably about 5 or 6 years ago. So Mr. Weeks, I'm certainly up for the challenge of addressing programming here. To the question posed by Ms. Gaynor as it relates to the gender, almost 10 years ago, there was a white paper written in Broward County as a JDAI effort that certainly alluded to and confirmed that one of the major crimes or delinquent acts of young girls entering the system was domestic violence. And so we were working in conjunction with PACE. And I want to say women in distress about how do we kind of interrupt that trajectory. So here are your numbers here. So other 91 is 45. So that's about, my math is correct, it's about 50-50. So it looks that way. And then as far as demographics, I'm just going to sort out Black. So we'll see. So 26, so about a third of the young people coming in who were, again, the civil citation, again, ruled out by our exception, perhaps was a Black youth or another 11. So that's certainly a third of those youth. And so that's one way of looking at it. And of course, here are the agencies that contribute to the data set. And I'm going to do all here. So you'll see the full data set. So those are the police departments who are coming in contact with the offenders.
I'm gonna
Can we look at Coral Springs, please?
Sure thing.
Chair, can we look at Coral Springs?
There you go.
Yes.
5.
I'm going to take a liberty as chair. Luckily, I'm chair for this meeting. And I'm gonna ask John James and Miss Michelle and Miss Evans, along with Miss Gaynor, to get together on a subcommittee specifically on this issue, and that is domestic violence eligibility for civil citation but failed to be issued because of the domestic violence. Make some recommendations to us as an advisory board as to how we should move forward. I, in my mind, have some ideas, but I would like for all of y'all to get together. Miss Michelle, are you still there?
Yes, sir.
Are you gonna participate in this
I
endeavor?
think I've expressed my position on domestic violence, Mr. Weeks. We go way back in domestic violence territory. So I don't know that you want me on that committee. I'm happy to keep it. I'll keep an open mind and an open ear, but I have my feelings about that as well.
I want you on the committee along with Mr. James, Ms. Evans, and Ms. Gaynor. It's important that we try to identify something to address this population. The numbers is striking. It stands out. And when it stands out, that means it's a trend and we need to address the trends. So let's put some energy behind it, get some thoughts and figure out a solution. And if that includes a legislative fix, like a specific civil citation that's designed for domestic violence, then that's where we need to go. There is programming that is specific to domestic violence when it's children and parents. There's a difference between domestic violence when it involves what is the term I'm looking for?
Partners.
partners,
relationships.
relationships.
Totally agree, but we do address those issues. That's why we have a diversion program. And as I've said many times, I will send these back to diversion on more than one occasion. We speak to the families directly. We try to get involved in even if they're not going to prosecute or want to go to diversion, what we can do to help them. Are they getting the help they need? So I understand that it's a very sensitive area. I don't know that we'll be able to solve the civil citation exception without having law enforcement on board, because I think it opens up a whole liability can of worms to ask law enforcement officers to go to what potentially sometimes, if my understanding of statistics is correct, can be some of the most dangerous calls for everybody, including law enforcement. So I think there's a lot that would have to be hashed out for that exception, but obviously law enforcement, and as particularly the experts on this in this meeting, can address that further, but I think it's asking a lot. So
We've asked a lot in the past.
I know you do.
we're not shy about
Amen to that.
Or tackling big issues. This is a big one, but when the data is so striking, and I'm sure this is not only demonstrative of Broward County, it's probably demonstrative of the state of Florida. There may be a state of Florida fix for it, and a legislative fix for it. We just have to identify what the problem is, find a solution, and then we'll embark on trying to get it put into place. So I'm asking you all to do that, come up with some ideas, come up with some suggestions, and present it at the next advisory board meeting to the board, and we can then figure out a path to move forward. So with that, let's move on with the agenda. And we've done missed opportunities. We've done. All right. So let me give you an update on the advisory board, or strike that, the detention center advisory board, and the progress on a detention center. We are
Jail information.
jail information. Thank you, Colonel Holmes. You have the floor.
Okay, I'll step up and do that. In reference to our overall jail population, including our main jail, this is as of August 4th. The total population was 3,628 inmates, and of the inmates, we had 26 that tested positive, and 5 of the 26 were identified at booking. They're in isolation and being treated accordingly. When we looked at the juvenile population, we had a total of 9 juveniles. We have 8 at the Paul Ryan, 1 at the North Broward Bureau, and we have 0 COVID cases. All of the juveniles have access to mental health services and behavioral services. And, the wearing of the mask is still being enforced in all our COVID-19 protocols at the juvenile locations, or at all the locations, are being enforced.
Before I turn it over to the detention center and get a report from the detention center on COVID-19, have you seen any instances of monkeypox? As we know, Broward County leads the state of Florida in the number of reported cases of monkeypox. And have you seen it in the jail? And has it impacted our children in the jail?
I have not heard of any yet. This, like I said, I just got this from last week, and there wasn't any mention of that on here. I will look into that and make sure, but I'm sure that if there was a case, I would have been informed by now. I'm assuming that there aren't, but I'm not guaranteeing that, okay? But I will look into that and make sure.
Madam Chief Probation Officer, you're going to be making a report for the detention center?
I will. Thank you.
Before you make that report, are we ever going to see the superintendent of the detention center on this advisory board call?
Witness protection is real. I cannot, I will not, I shall not divulge said location of said person aforementioned.
Well, as the chair for this meeting, I'm going to ask that a superintendent from the detention center be present at the next advisory board meeting. It is all, you are always welcome, and we value you when you're here, but we like to hear from the horse's mouth. And you're in charge of probation, and we have issues with probation. we will raise them with you. But if we have issues in the detention center, we would like to hear from the superintendent.
I will convey said message to person in a undisclosed location. Yes,
Thank
I
you.
will. I will certainly.
Or have the area superintendent in charge of detention come in on his stead.
Okay.
He has a boss. They can come report for him.
Correct. There's a chief and there's a director as well. So starting with the leadership in detention services, just want to let you know that the agency has a new assistant secretary of detention services. If you have not heard, Ms. Cena Johnson Wilson is now the assistant secretary for probably about a month now for detention services. Yes, and so she was previously a team member at Day Detention, so she knows our area well, and she's quite familiar with the operations of the department. So, and she's been part of our training team for almost 20, probably about 15 years now. So, so she's first time we have a Black woman over that particular functional area of the department. So we're probably looking for some some shifts over there in that particular area. So I will certainly let her know and her team know, Director Housel as well as Chief Burrow, about the inquiry and the request, not inquiry, but the actual request for presence at the September meeting, Mr. Acting Chair. I will pass that along. As far as our numbers are concerned, as of 2:15 this afternoon, there were a total of 35 youth in secure detention. Of those, 33 being male, 22 being female. There were no cases of monkeypox or COVID in our facility. None have been noted in our respective facilities that I'm aware of.
Just so the advisory board is aware, what is the max population for the detention center? And you have 33 youth, you're well under the max population.
I believe it's 100. I believe it's 103.
So we are at a relatively low population within the detention center for youth. Correct.
Absolutely. About a third of that. And then for young people who are committed awaiting placement, we typically, especially their co-defendants, and it's a lot of factors, those young people are distributed to other detention centers in the region just to prevent any behavioral, challenges for waiting a placement in a program. So, but we're managing at about 30, no more than about 40 on any given day, average daily population.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Judge Robolo.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to take this opportunity to pat my brethren, the Administrative Judge Elijah Williams, the Honorable Stacey Ross, the Honorable Michael Orlando, and myself, I'm patting myself in the back, for those numbers being the way that they are. Just had to throw that in there.
We appreciate all of the members of the judiciary and of the system for recognizing that children are oftentimes better suited when they're not placed in a secure detention environment. All of the research, for those that are watching this in cyberspace, all of the research is well documented that the longer a child is in secure detention, the deeper they go into the juvenile justice system and the criminal justice system. So these efforts to reduce the time that children are in those type of environments is well suited for the betterment of the long-term health and productivity of that child and of this community. So we appreciate those efforts. The reason why I do those announcements is because people will watch this and they won't know the entire scope of why we do this work. And I need to make sure that it's put in proper context why we are doing what we're doing, because the research, we're following research and data that supports this is the way to go. So we appreciate that, Judge Robolo.
Mr. Chair, yes, if I to piggyback on again, thanks to all the judicial bench led by the awesome four in Broward County, where we have not had a turnover in about a decade in judicial leadership, and that makes the difference, definitely in our respective jurisdiction. But I also want to add that as a result of the recent statutory change that allows the judiciary and many folks to ask for longer stays in the detention center, that I don't want to speak for anyone, that I don't anticipate us using that without great consideration, right? Because we do understand that deeper penetration is likely when you just incarcerate for punitive purposes. But what I will add is, in partnership with Broward Sheriff's Office, the impact of the utilization of not effective monitoring, but EM, electronic monitoring. One of the things the department is going to do different in about 30 to 90 days is we have committed to and developed a command center. So we're better able to manage those young people who are in the community on the highest form of GPS surveillance, right, monitoring, to better respond to those alerts. And so we're looking to have a command center in place probably by October, which means we'll be able almost to respond to violations in the moment, which has been a system area of improvement. But again, I want to thank Colonel Holmes through him to Director Shaw for stepping up and saying that he will work with the department on the 24/7 piece of that. And we run about 12 to 15 kids on EM on any given day. So it's a small number, but it's still important to keep our eye on those young folks, so we don't ever want to compromise public safety as we are, to your point, Gordon, Mr. Weeks, progressive in how we deal with our young people.
Any questions on this issue or any comments on this issue? I have a question about the department's, utilization of Zoom technology, Teams technology for virtual reporting for probation and supervision. We know that the Department of Corrections has authorized the use of Zoom technology for purposes of adult probation reporting. For those of you that are unaware, there's usually a requirement that someone on probation or supervision by the department meets with their probation officer once a month or on a more regular basis. Probation officer will show up at their homes unannounced to do spot checks. Is the department going to be utilizing Zoom platforms or video platforms in order to do that more effectively, rather than having folks, not when it comes to children, it's not the child, having the parents take a day off work to come down to your office and sit in your office and do a report?
So a couple of things, because they are children and we know that the most time at the one with their parents, we are out in the community doing community-based supervision. So we're out evenings, weekends, even on holidays, seeing the young people in their environment and what's most convenient for them. We're also, when school resumes, we'll be also resuming doing school visits. So that's typically how we make about 70% of our contacts, which are outside of the office, because it is inconvenient for a parent and perhaps even a young person. So that's the overall format. As far as I know, the chair sent me some legislation. It did not impact the department because that department that was referenced was the adults, was DOC. So we have no provision to do it that way. Particularly when we were using a virtual platform, it was under the executive order of the governor for the emergency order. And when that concluded in, what year am I in? Earlier this year, I believe it was, then we ended the virtual supervision process. I will not say though that it's not something that does not remain on the table for discussion, because as chiefs, we continue to ask for the department to consider more convenient ways of supervising children without compromising public safety. So Mr. Weeks, we don't have any legislative authority, but as far as a best practice, we've asked that be given consideration by our leadership.
So what I'm hearing and what I seem to understand is that with the legislative authority, it'll be easier to implement it throughout the department statewide, but without the legislative authority, the leadership is going to make determinations on how, if, or when you use it in isolated incidences. Correct,
right, without either statutory or administrative code to direct those procedures, then yes, it will be executive leadership.
Has the department taken any position with respect to the chief probation officer throughout the state polling you on whether this platform is something that you guys would want to adopt and whether they are going to propose legislation that will be similar that, what adults are using?
At this point, I know it's not part of the initial LBR package that we are discussing now, right? Because we're working on that now. I don't believe it's on my last knowledge on that wasn't on the list, but we were queried as to what best practices we wanted to continue post-pandemic in the month of April. All the chiefs and respective leaders in the probation branch, and that was definitely on the list.
Did it receive any support from the probation chiefs?
Yes, of course, we supported it, but I can tell you it didn't receive any pushback. Like, we weren't asked to leave Tallahassee. So we were still, again, we were allowed to put, it's probably about a dozen things on the list of things we found to be best practices.
Any questions from the board?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Judge Robolo.
With the, I just wanted to get back with Ms. Evans with the new law that's effective July 1, which I don't know if any of the judges have started using it yet, which allows a judge to detain a juvenile for a longer period of time, including up until the disposition, the hearing, the trial. I anticipate, Ms. Evans, that in the future that there might be a need for a lot more electronic monitoring. And given the numbers that you've given us today, I don't think that's going to be, so that's something that Department of Juvenile Justice might want to look into, because I definitely see that multiplying, which is not a bad thing because it'll be in lieu of securely detaining a juvenile, but just something to keep out there for the future reference.
Absolutely. So with that, thank you, Judge Robolo. So with that legislative change, the department also submitted our LBR for support for additional devices. So, and we did some analysis as to our projected capacity and utilization rates. And so that came together. And so we keep a few on the shelf and we continue to monitor that, but we do anticipate a need to increase our inventory.
I'm going to ask that we add this particular item to our juvenile predispositional service report, where we're showing the number of youth, if any, that are being held in excess of the 21 days pursuant to the new statute, because that's something we need to monitor just because it's new and we don't know how it's going to develop. And if we find some trends with that, we can circle back and address the trends that we discover. So I'm asking that moving forward, if we can have a report prepared from July 1st, because it went into effect. There may not be any, but let's start from July 1st and continue monitoring it throughout the remainder of this year, fiscal year, until next July 1st, and see what we discover.
Mr. Chair, have you or Mr. James heard of any judge? I haven't used it yet.
I have not, but I will defer to Mr. James because he's in there every day. Hearing nothing from Mr. James, he's not.
Yeah, no one has used it yet. And I think there's, well, I'm not gonna tell you my way of attacking this thing right now. However, I do think there's some things that are there that need to be established before the court can just simply state that the juvenile should be held up until 75 days, and then they have to have a hearing, I think, a couple of days before the 75th day. So, I mean, you know, I've already put together.
We're prepared for the issue.
Absolutely.
We just hopefully, you know, let's just monitor it for now. We'll deal with the legal stuff in court as they mature, because like everything, new statutes are going to be challenged. The scope of them, whether they're excessive, whether they're overbroad, whether, you know, the process is appropriate. But those are legal challenges. We'll deal with that later on. So with that being said, any other
Mr. Chair, I just want to put out, just again, for those who are watching, we're referencing House Bill 77029. that resulted in a change in Florida statute 785.26. For anyone who just wants to reference that outside of here. Again, House Bill 7029, Florida statute 985.26 was amended.
In the interest of time, I am going to hold my report on the detention center. There are no new updates as of yet. The legislative session will be beginning, and we will do our best to try to get support for an appropriation directed towards the Broward County Detention Center for a new facility. I am going to also hold my DMC report for the next meeting, and I'm going to ask, is there anything good for the order or good of the order? No one? Hearing nothing? Going once, twice? Madam President, how'd I do?
Wonderfully. I'll give you a good report to the judge here shortly.
Please give me a good report, because
I will. I absolutely will. Thank you.
And
I'm gonna put the video up so she'll be able to review it like she always does and give her critiques.
we're ending on time.
Mr. Weeks, I forgot to say, you did. I want to give a shout out to the Public Defender's Office for our second workshop that was held earlier this month on August 2nd. The Know Your Rights workshop. It was highly engaging, informative, and interactive. The skits should have been recorded. That's all I'm going to say. Certainly, thanks to the whole team who came out. Walked past them. They were dressed in uniform. I walked past them. And they were very engaged, and they also shared some feedback with me as to some things they would like the department to do that will make their job easier. So I'm going to take that under consideration and work with some team members on that. But again, want to give a shout out. I sent a formal thank you today. Our next workshop will be in the month of October. We're looking to do this with law enforcement. So Colonel Holmes, I'll be calling you. And again, we're going to do in that North Quadrant area, and then we're going to work our way around the county. So again, team.
We really appreciate that. No thanks goes to me. That was all John James. Good work, Mr. James. We are always going to be available for children in this community. So all you have to do is reach out and we'll be there. Thank you to all of the board members for giving me some grace to bear with me to get through this. And we look forward to Judge Holmes getting back so she can chair and lead us through this. So you guys have a good day. Hearing nothing.
Great job today. Great job, Mr.
Y'all take care.
Mr. Chair, you did all right for an Omega man.
Hey, y'all just be nice to me. I'll take care.
All right, take care.
All right.
Thanks.